My name is Ruth Taylor, and this is the story I once wished I would never have to tell. I married Jason Taylor when I was 27. At the time, he was charming, attentive, and made me believe that our love would weather every storm. But as months turned into years and no child came, the warmth in his family's eyes slowly turned cold. Please kindly take a moment and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Thank you. Back to my story. Began with whispers. Veronica, my mother-in-law, would lean toward her daughter Rita and speak in a voice she thought I couldn't hear. "Some women are simply barren," she murmured once over dinner, her fork scraping her plate with disdain. I sat across from her, pretending not to notice, though each word pressed into me like a blade. Jason never defended me. He would chew his food, glance at his phone, and act as though the conversation had nothing to do with us. The whispers grew bolder. Veronica would ask loudly in front of relatives, "So, Ruth, any good news for us? We're waiting for a grandson, you know." When I shook my head, she sighed dramatically, as if my very existence was a disappointment. Richard, my father-in-law, rarely said anything, but his silence carried its own judgment. Rita was the cruelest. She was only a few years younger than me, unmarried but smug, and she never missed a chance to throw salt into my wounds. "I heard women who can't conceive usually hide it from men before marriage," she sneered once. "Did you lie to Jason?" That night I cried in the bathroom, muffling my sobs with a towel so Jason wouldn't hear. But deep down, I knew he already knew and simply didn't care. The breaking point came one stormy evening in late autumn. Rain pounded against the windows and thunder shook the house. Veronica had invited some of her church friends over, and I was serving coffee when she suddenly announced, "Pray for my son. He married a barren woman." What a curse! Her words slammed into me harder than the storm outside. I felt the eyes of every woman in that room turn toward me, sharp and pitying. Jason sat on the couch, laughing at something on television, not even flinching at his mother's cruelty. When I asked Veronica, my voice trembling, why she would humiliate me that way, she stood and pointed toward the door. "Get out, Ruth," she barked. "You've brought nothing but emptiness into this family. I'll leave my son to find a real wife." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. "In the rain," I whispered. "Yes, in the rain," she shouted, her voice rising above the thunder. Jason finally looked up, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Maybe you should go," he said casually, as though discussing the weather. I froze, unable to comprehend how the man I had loved for 6 years could watch his mother cast me out like trash. My hands trembled as I set down the coffee tray. Then I grabbed my coat from the hook, though it offered little against the storm. Veronica opened the door wide, and the icy wind whipped into the room. Without another word, she shoved me out. The rain drenched me instantly, soaking my hair, plastering my clothes to my skin. I stood there on the porch, shivering, staring at Jason through the doorway. He didn't move. He only laughed lightly and shook his head, as though I were some nuisance finally gone. I walked down the driveway, my shoes sinking into muddy puddles. Each step felt heavier, not from the water but from the crushing weight of betrayal. Cars hissed by on the street, their headlights blurring through the rain, and I wondered what strangers must have thought, seeing a woman stumbling alone in such weather. I had nowhere to go. My parents had passed years earlier, and most of my friends had slowly drifted away after my marriage. Who would I call? Where could I run? For the first time in my life, I felt truly abandoned. I found shelter beneath the awning of a closed store downtown. The neon sign above flickered weakly, casting a pale glow over the sidewalk. I sat there, hugging myself against the cold, rain dripping from my hair onto the concrete. Hours passed. My phone buzzed once, just a reminder from the bank. Not a call from Jason. Not even a message asking where I had gone. That night carved a scar into my soul. The humiliation of being branded barren in front of strangers. The pain of being thrown out of my own home. The cruelty of watching my husband laugh as I stumbled into the storm. I wished, for a brief, fleeting moment, that the rain would wash me away completely. But dawn came. The rain eased, the clouds parted, and the city stirred awake. I stood, stiff and aching, my clothes still damp, my spirit crushed. Yet somewhere deep inside, a small flicker of determination remained. I would not let their rejection define me forever. Till the wound was raw. Every face that glanced my way as I walked the streets seemed to carry judgment. Every passing couple reminded me of the love I once thought I had. I told myself over and over, just keep moving, Ruth. But each step felt like walking barefoot across shards of glass. When I finally scraped together enough courage, I rented a small room in a shabby part of town. Smelled of mildew, the carpet was stained, and the heater rattled noisily, but it was mine. No Veronica to sneer at me, no Rita to insult me, no Jason to laugh in my face. Only silence. A silence heavy with loneliness, but also with the possibility of healing. Nights were the hardest. I lay awake listening to the heater wheeze, replaying that evening in my mind. The laughter, the insults, the cold rain. I couldn't erase the sound of Jason's voice telling me to leave. Love doesn't vanish overnight, and that was its cruelty. My heart still ached for him even as my mind replayed his betrayal. Yet even in my despair, I sensed the faint stirrings of resilience. They had cast me out, yes. They had broken me down to nothing. But I was still standing. That truth, fragile as it was, became my anchor as the days crept forward. Those first weeks on my own felt like drifting through a fog, each day bleeding into the next. I woke in that damp little room with its rattling heater and broken blinds, staring at the ceiling and wondering how my life had unraveled so quickly. Marriage had once been my safe harbor, the place where I thought I'd always be cherished. Now I had nothing but a suitcase of clothes and memories that burned like acid. Money was the first challenge. Jason had controlled most of our finances, and when I checked the bank account that still bore both our names, I discovered he had quietly moved almost everything out. All I had left were the savings I had tucked away from freelance work I had done years earlier. It wasn't much, but it had to stretch. I bought cheap groceries, instant noodles, canned beans, bread that grew stale too quickly. I learned to cut back on everything, even heating, wearing extra sweaters at night to save on the electric bill. During the day, I scoured job listings. My degree was in communications, but it had been years since I'd worked in an office. Rejections filled my inbox, sometimes kind, sometimes curt. Till I refused to give up. I walked from block to block, dropping resumes at shops and cafes, smiling through the shame that clung to me like a second skin. A small bookstore finally offered me part-time hours. It wasn't glamorous, but arranging shelves and ringing up customers gave me a rhythm to hold on to, a reason to rise from bed each morning. The emotional toll was heavier. At night, when the city outside my window grew quiet, I lay awake wrestling with bitterness. My husband's laughter haunted me most. I could still see the curl of his lips, the glint in his eyes as his mother threw me out. It wasn't just Veronica's cruelty, it was his complicity that shattered me. I thought of our wedding day, the vows we had spoken before friends and God. For better or worse. Did those words mean nothing? Loneliness gnawed at me. I wanted to pick up the phone and call someone, anyone, but shame sealed my lips. I imagined the pity in their voices, the unspoken judgment. She couldn't even give him a child. So I kept my pain private. Customers at the bookstore saw only a polite clerk with a ready smile. No one knew the tears I shed each night when the lights dimmed. And yet, slowly, something within me began to shift. Each morning I walked to work past the same cracked sidewalks, the same flickering street lamps. First, I saw only grayness. But over time I noticed small things. The cafe owner who always watered his flowers despite the chill, the young mother pushing her stroller and humming softly to her baby, the elderly man who tipped his hat to me every morning. Life pulsed around me. It whispered, "You are not done yet." One rainy afternoon, as I shelved books near the window, a little girl came in with her father. She had blonde curls, a red raincoat, and a laugh like silver bells. She darted between the shelves, touching the spines with delight, before rushing back to her father's arms. My chest ached watching them, not with jealousy but with longing. I had always dreamed of motherhood, of holding a child who carried both my love and my hope. The thought that this dream had been stolen from me, branded barren, discarded like spoiled fruit, nearly broke me. Yet something else stirred too, a stubborn ember of defiance. I promised myself I would not be defined by their cruelty. Whether I ever became a mother or not, I was still a woman of worth. I repeated that truth each night like a prayer, until slowly it began to root itself inside me. But healing is never straight. Some nights, the past would ambush me. I'd remember the feel of the rain soaking through my coat, Veronica's voice echoing in my ears. "Get out! I'll leave my son to find a real wife." Those words could still slice through me without mercy. To fight the despair, I started writing in a journal. First, the pages were filled with anger, harsh words scrawled in shaky handwriting. But over time, they softened into reflections, even gratitude. Gratitude for surviving, for the bookstore job, for the sunrise peeking through cracked blinds each morning. Gratitude for the resilience I hadn't known I carried. There were practical struggles too. My room was in a rough neighborhood, and some nights I heard shouting in the hallway or bottles breaking on the street. Once, the electricity flickered off for hours, plunging me into darkness. I curled under my blankets, whispering to myself that it was temporary, that better days would come. And they did, in small doses. The bookstore owner, Mrs. Green, a widow in her 60s, began to take a liking to me. She would bring me muffins she baked at home and sometimes insisted I take leftover sandwiches. "You're too thin," she scolded gently. Her kindness soothed a wound I hadn't realized was still open, the longing for someone to see me, not as barren or broken, but simply human. I grew stronger, inch by inch. Each paycheck gave me a sliver of independence. Each smile from a customer reminded me that I could still connect, still belong. Each entry in my journal taught me that pain could be transformed into resilience. Yet, for all the progress, there was still an emptiness. I wanted closure, a sense that the nightmare with Jason and his family was firmly behind me. But closure does not come when wounds are still bleeding. Comes in unexpected ways when life decides to unfold another chapter. And mine was waiting just around the corner. Because not long after, as winter's chill began to ease into the first shy hints of spring, I fell ill. First, I thought it was exhaustion, maybe the flu. But as days passed, my body whispered a different truth, one that would change everything. The first signs were subtle, waves of nausea in the mornings, fatigue that pressed down on me no matter how much I slept. I brushed it off at first, blaming stress and the cheap food that filled my cupboards. But when I nearly fainted one afternoon at the bookstore, Mrs. Green insisted I see a doctor. I scheduled an appointment reluctantly, fearing what I might hear. Part of me worried it was some serious illness, maybe the punishment my in-laws had cursed upon me with their cruel words. Sitting in the clinic's waiting room, the sterile scent of antiseptic heavy in the air, I whispered to myself, "Whatever it is, I'll face it." When Dr. Helen Brooks entered with her warm smile, I felt a flicker of reassurance. She asked questions, ran tests, and finally returned with results that seemed almost too miraculous to believe. "Ruth," she said gently, "you're pregnant." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. Pregnant? Me? The woman whose name had been spat out with contempt, branded barren, tossed into the rain? My throat tightened, my hands trembled, and tears blurred my vision. "Are you sure?" I whispered. Her smile deepened. "More than sure. And there's something else, you're carrying twins." The room spun, not from fear but from an overwhelming wave of emotions colliding all at once. Relief, joy, disbelief, even anger. Twins. Not only was I not barren, I was carrying two lives within me. My body, once shamed and dismissed, was proving every cruel word wrong. I left the clinic in a daze, clutching the ultrasound photo like it was a lifeline. On the black and white image, two tiny shapes nestled side by side, fragile yet powerful enough to rewrite my entire story. I pressed the picture to my chest as tears streamed freely. That night, alone in my little room, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, one hand on my belly. I whispered softly, "You are wanted. Both of you. I will protect you with everything I have." My heart swelled with love I had never known, fierce and tender at the same time. But with the joy came fear. How would I raise twins on my own? I had barely enough money for rent and groceries, let alone diapers, formula, or medical bills. The weight of responsibility felt crushing, yet it was also grounding. For the first time since being thrown out, I had purpose again. These children needed me, and I would not fail them. In the weeks that followed, every flutter in my belly became a reminder of resilience. When morning sickness left me doubled over, I told myself it was a sign of life. When exhaustion made it hard to shelve books at the store, I reminded myself that strength often blooms in hardship. Mrs. Green noticed my pallor one afternoon and, after gentle probing, I finally confided in her. Her eyes softened with tears and she hugged me tightly. "You're stronger than you know, Ruth," she whispered. "These babies are a gift. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Her support meant more than she could imagine. For the first time in months, I felt seen not through the lens of shame but through the lens of hope. Still, the shadow of Jason and his family lingered. Some nights, I would wake from dreams where Veronica's voice echoed, "Barren. Worthless." I would sit up, clutching my stomach, reminding myself of the truth growing inside me. Yet the fear of them finding out gnawed at me. What if Jason tried to reclaim me now, not out of love, but because of the children? That fear turned into reality sooner than I expected. It began with a message on my phone. Jason. His name lit up the screen like a ghost I thought I had exorcised. I stared at it, my heart pounding. Finally, I opened it. "I heard you're pregnant. Twins? Ruth, please, can we talk?" My stomach twisted. How had he found out? Perhaps word had traveled through one of the few mutual friends who still lived in town. Or maybe his family had connections at the clinic. Whatever the case, he knew. More messages followed in the days ahead. "I'm sorry about everything. I was wrong. I want to be part of their lives." "Then you can't keep them from me, Ruth. I'm their father." His sudden desperation felt hollow, as if the man who had once laughed while I was cast into the rain had been replaced by someone else. But I hadn't forgotten. I couldn't forget the sting of humiliation, the coldness in his eyes, the sound of the door slamming behind me. Love may forgive, but betrayal etches scars too deep to ignore. I resolved then and there. He would not touch these children, not if I could help it. They deserved better than a father who had abandoned their mother in her darkest hour. So I kept my distance. I ignored his calls, blocked his number, avoided places where I might run into him or his family. Instead, I focused on preparing for the twins. I cut back even more, saving every dollar I could. I bought baby clothes secondhand, pieced together supplies, and made endless lists of what I would still need. The fear was real, but so was the determination. Pregnancy gave me clarity. Veronica's cruel words no longer defined me. Jason's betrayal no longer dictated my worth. What mattered now were the two tiny lives growing within me and the future I would build for them. Every day I reminded myself, I was no longer just Ruth Taylor, the woman thrown into the rain. I was a mother, fierce and unyielding. And that identity, more than any title of wife or daughter-in-law, was the one I embraced fully. Path ahead would not be easy, but I had already survived the storm. Now I carried within me not just children, but proof that life blooms even in the soil of rejection. And though Jason's pleas grew louder, though his regret knocked against the door of my past, I kept my gaze fixed firmly on the future, one that belonged to me and my twins alone. Jason's attempts to reach me became relentless. First, it was messages, apologies spilling across the screen, promises of change, confessions that he had been blind and foolish. Then came the calls, dozens in a day, his voice cracking with a desperation I had never heard when I was his wife. "Ruth, please," he begged on one voicemail. "I made a mistake. I laughed when I should have stood up for you. I let Mom push you away and it kills me every night. Don't shut me out. I want to be there for you, for them. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed listening, one hand resting on my belly, feeling the tiny kicks flutter beneath my skin. His words scraped at old wounds, but I reminded myself, words are easy. Where was this man when I was shivering in the rain, humiliated before strangers? Where was he when his mother called me Barren? His silence then was louder than all his apologies now. The more I ignored him, the more desperate he became. He showed up outside the bookstore one afternoon, leaning against his car, waiting. My heart lurched when I saw him through the glass window. I considered sneaking out the back, but something inside me stiffened. I would not run. When I stepped outside, the air between us thickened. His eyes swept over me, lingering on the curve of my belly beneath my coat. "So it's true," he whispered. "You're carrying twins." I folded my arms. "Yes, and it changes nothing." He winced but pressed on. "Ruth, I want to be part of their lives. I don't care if you hate me. Please just let me be their father." I stared at him, studying the familiar lines of his face. Once those eyes had made me feel safe. Now they were the eyes of a stranger. "You had your chance, Jason. When I needed you most, you laughed. Do you know what it feels like to be thrown out like garbage while your husband smirks from the couch?" His jaw tightened, shame flickering across his face. I was a coward. I let Mom control me. I see that now, but I can't undo the past. All I can do is try to be better for them. My chest tightened, not from love but from anger. "No. You don't get to use them to wash away your guilt. These babies are not your redemption story. They are mine." For a moment, he was silent, the sounds of the street filling the space between us. Then his voice broke. "Please, Ruth. Don't shut me out completely. I want to see them, hold them, love them. I'll do anything." I shook my head slowly. Love is not proven by words spoken in desperation. It's proven by actions when no one is watching. And when it mattered, your action was to do nothing. His shoulders slumped. For the first time, I saw Jason not as the man who had hurt me, but as a man who had destroyed himself. Still, pity was not enough to erase betrayal. I turned away and walked down the street, each step steadier than the last, while his voice trailed behind me. After that encounter, he tried different tactics. Flowers appeared at my door, notes tucked into their stems. I threw them away. Emails flooded my inbox, ranging from apologies to threats of legal action. "You can't keep me from my children," he wrote once. My hands trembled as I read those words, but I steadied myself with a single thought. I would do whatever it took to shield my twins from the toxicity I had endured. As the weeks passed, I began to plan in secret. Jason and his family saw these babies as trophies or tools for redemption, then distance would be my only defense. I researched countries where I could start anew, where Jason's reach would falter, where Veronica's judgmental eyes would never land on my children. Canada called to me first, a place with space to breathe, new beginnings and opportunities. I kept my plans quiet, sharing them only with Mrs. Green, who offered unwavering support. "Do what you must, Ruth," she said, holding my hands in hers. "Your peace is worth more than anyone's approval." Jason's attempts grew frantic as my due date neared. One evening, he showed up at my door, pounding so hard I feared the thin wood would splinter. "Let me in," he shouted. "I deserve to see you." I stood inside, silent, my back against the wall, refusing to answer. Tears slid down my cheeks, but my resolve held firm. He might pound, he might beg, he might threaten, but I would not yield. Not for him. Not for Veronica. Not for anyone who had watched me drown in sorrow and only laughed. When he finally left, the hallway fell quiet again. I slid down onto the floor, cradling my belly, whispering to the lives within me, "I promise you'll never know what that kind of cruelty feels like. Not as long as I'm here." In that moment, I realized something profound. My strength no longer came from what I had lost, but from what I was protecting. My twins were not just children to me, they were my shield, my anchor, my proof that love could still bloom in the soil of betrayal. And so, while Jason's change of heart played out in frantic gestures and empty words, mine had already happened in silence. I had chosen a new life, one where my children would never have to question whether they were wanted, one where I would never again wait for love to be proven by someone incapable of giving it. The next step was clear. I would leave everything behind, cross borders if I had to, and carve a future where laughter no longer carried the sting of cruelty but the sweetness of joy. By the time the twins were nearly due, my resolve had hardened into something unshakable. I had spent long nights comparing visa requirements, calculating costs, and imagining a life where Jason and his family could no longer touch us. It was terrifying, leaving behind the only country I had ever known, but the thought of raising my children under the shadow of that cruelty terrified me more. Canada became my choice. It wasn't simply about distance. It was about the possibility of raising my children in a place where they would not inherit the scorn of Veronica's voice or the weakness of Jason's silence. I wanted them to breathe fresh air, to grow up knowing their mother had chosen courage over bitterness. Mrs. Green helped me quietly prepare. She introduced me to an immigration advisor she trusted, who explained the paperwork, the process, the timelines. I gathered my documents, scraped together every cent I had, and filled out applications with trembling hands. It was exhausting, but each form I completed felt like a step away from my old life and a step closer to freedom. The day the twins arrived was both harrowing and breathtaking. Labor stretched for hours, waves of pain crashing through me, but when it ended, I held two perfect little lives in my arms. A boy and a girl. Their cries pierced the hospital room, raw and insistent, but to me they sounded like hymns of redemption. I wept, kissing their tiny heads, whispering, "You are my miracles! You are proof that love survives." Jason tried to visit the hospital. I had instructed the staff not to allow him near me, and they honored my request. Still, I heard his voice echoing in the corridor, pleading with the nurses, demanding to be let in. My heart raced, but I held my babies tighter, rocking them as if my arms were a fortress. For once, I felt no temptation to yield. His pleas were no longer chains, they were just noise, powerless against the bond one had with my children. Weeks later, paperwork cleared and tickets were booked. The morning of my departure, I stood at the airport with two carriers strapped to me, passports tucked in my bag, determination steadying my every breath. The gate agent smiled kindly as she checked my documents, unaware of the storm I had escaped. Each step toward the plane felt like a shedding of old skin, a farewell to humiliation, betrayal, and nights of rain-soaked despair. As the plane lifted off, the city below shrank into a patchwork of lights. I looked out the window, one hand resting on each of my sleeping babies, and whispered, "We're free!" Tears streamed down my face, but they were not tears of grief. They were tears of release. Life in Canada was not easy at first. I rented a small apartment, modest but clean, with sunlight that poured through the windows in the mornings. I worked part-time at a community library, taking shifts that allowed me to be home with the twins most of the day. Money was tight, sleep was scarce, but joy had returned. Their giggles filled the rooms, their tiny hands clutching mine reminded me daily that I had made the right choice. I built new friendships, slowly, with neighbors and coworkers. They saw me not as barren or broken but as Ruth, the woman with the bright-eyed twins who never stopped smiling despite her tiredness. I carried my scars quietly, but I no longer bled from them. Jason's attempts to reach me continued for a while. Letters arrived, some apologetic, some demanding. I never replied. Eventually the letters stopped. Perhaps he grew weary, or perhaps life in his family home pressed forward without me. It didn't matter anymore. His silence was the closure I had longed for but never needed. Twins grew quickly, their laughter echoing in our little apartment. Each birthday candle I lit, each bedtime story I read, felt like reclaiming pieces of the life I had once been denied. They became my anchor, my reason to rise every morning, my proof that resilience is not born from ease but from surviving storms. Sometimes, on quiet nights after they had fallen asleep, I would stand at the window and let memories flicker. The rain-soaked night when I was thrown out, the sting of Veronica's words, the sound of Jason's laughter. Those images no longer shattered me. Instead, they reminded me of how far I had come, how the woman they tried to break had built a new life across borders. I was not barren. I was not worthless. I was not the woman Jason had abandoned. I was Ruth Taylor, mother of twins, survivor of cruelty, builder of a new beginning. My journey had not been one I would have chosen, but it became the story that defined my strength. And every time my children curled against me, their tiny breaths steady in the night, I knew the truth. The rain that once soaked me in shame had also washed me clean. I had risen, stronger, freer, and determined never to let anyone's laughter silence me again.